How does a small island nation, battered by wind and rain on the edge of Europe, come to dominate a quarter of the globe? How does it plant its flag on so many shores that it has said the sun never sets upon its empire? To understand the British Empire, we must first return to a time when Britain was not a conqueror but a target. In the 11th century, England was invaded by Normans. In the centuries that followed, it was shaped by civil war, by dynastic struggles, and by its position on the fringes of the great powers of Europe. Spain and Portugal had carved out vast empires in the Americas. Britain, feeling the pull of power and profit, launched its own ventures. But over time, through a mix of circumstance and sheer will, Britain began to look outward across the seas. The first sparks of empire didn't begin with dominance. They began with exploration, trade, and competition. By the late 16th century, explorers like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh were braving unknown waters, seeking gold, spices, and glory. These were not yet conquests, they were seeds, and then came a pivotal turn. Jamestown in 1607 marked the beginning of permanent English presence in North America. Colonies followed with control of the seas, Britain could project power anywhere on Earth. These weren't just outposts, they were new worlds. The slave trade, brutal, inhumane, and vast, became a pillar of empire. It was a turning point not just militarily, but symbolically. Britain wasn't just trading with India now, it was beginning to rule it. Millions of lives were stolen and trafficked across the Atlantic in a system that enriched British merchants and financed its naval dominance. It began with trading posts, then ports, then armies, and while some Indians collaborated with British rule, many resisted. Famines, taxation, and repression took a heavy toll. Britain's colonies in North America, tired of taxes and rule without representation, broke free. It was a loss that wounded British pride, but it didn't end the empire. In fact, it pushed Britain to look elsewhere with greater hunger and ambition. British engineers laid tracks from Cairo to Cape Town, from Bombay to Calcutta. English became a global language. Cricket, of all things, traveled farther than many armies. But progress, when tied to profit, can blind the conscience. The Industrial Revolution transformed Britain into the world's workshop. Sepoys, or Indian soldiers in British service, rose in mutiny. It was more than a rebellion against foreign rule, against disrespect, against centuries of slow subjugation. With factories came goods, and with goods came markets. Colonies were no longer just sources of wealth, they were vital pieces in a vast global machine. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa governed themselves, but remained loyal. India was the centerpiece. In Africa, borders were drawn in London Ofuna with no regard for the people who lived within them. From the trenches of Europe to the deserts of Mesopotamia, colonial soldiers fought and died in a war they did not start. When it ended, Britain gained even more territory but lost something deeper, a sense of invincibility. The British Crown took direct control of India from the East India Company. Queen Victoria was declared empress, and the empire, once built by merchants, was now the formal project of the state. Some with celebration, others with bloodshed. And slowly Britain's hold on India tightened not as a nation but as a corporation. In Ireland, famine and colonial misrule led to mass death. In Kenya, rebels were tortured. In India, peaceful protesters were massacred. In every corner of empire, the cost of British rule was measured in human lives and broken traditions. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted a royal charter to the East India Company, a commercial enterprise that would, in time, become one of the most powerful entities the world had ever known. It also imposed ideologies, enforced hierarchies, and left wounds that still haven't healed. While the company advanced in the East, British settlers were staking claims across the Atlantic. The empire lives on in its multiculturalism, its global outlook, its debates, its history. A land partitioned in fire and blood into India and Pakistan, marking the beginning of the end of the empire. It was about ambition, relentless, unapologetic, and deeply human in its brilliance and its flaws. And then came the Caribbean sugar islands, like Jamaica and Barbados, built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Legal systems, parliaments, school uniforms, afternoon tea they endured, sometimes welcome, sometimes or as something far more complicated, neither glory nor guilt alone, but a mirror of humanity's greatest heights and darkest impulses, always complex. By the 18th century, the British Empire was not just expanding, it was transforming. The Royal Navy became the backbone of its strength, and then, in 1757, came a moment that changed everything. In the plains of Plassey in eastern India, Robert Clive led a small British force to victory over the Nawab of Bengal and his French allies. From that point, India, rich in culture, in resources, in complexity, became the jewel in the crown. Then, in the late 1700s, a shockwave of the American Revolution, Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, wherever there was land to claim, people to trade with, or, in the 19th century, the empire reached new heights. Railways, telegraphs, shipping lines, banks to arteries of empire were laid across continents. And yet, beneath the power and prestige was a shadow. The British Empire brought roads, schools, and governance, but it also brought exploitation, racial hierarchies, and cultural erasure. Still, Britain saw itself as a civilizing force, a nation carrying the torch of progress. Then came 1857, the Indian Rebellion, or the First War of Independence, depending on who tells the story. The rebellion failed, but its impact was seismic. By the early 20th century, the British Empire had reached its zenith. And then came World War I. The empire stood united but paid dearly. World War II sealed the fate. Britain won, yes, but it emerged, battered, economically drained, and facing the undeniable truth, the world had changed. In 1947, India gained independence. In the decades that followed, the empire unraveled. Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, Malaysia, and dozens more one by one, they broke free. By the 1970s, the British Empire as a political force had faded, but its legacy, that never faded. English is now spoken on every continent. The empire shaped the modern world. It created global networks of trade and migration. It built cities. It drew borders. And what of Britain itself? It shrank. Yes, but its identity never fully returned to its island roots. So when we say the sun never set on the British Empire, it wasn't just about size. And today, we still live with its consequences. So I ask you, how should we remember the British Empire? As a marvel of maritime power and administration? As a force of oppression? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. These stories belong to all of us. If you found this journey through 6 centuries of empire thought-provoking, please like the video, share it, and subscribe for more powerful history told with heart. Because history isn't just about facts, it's about meaning, and we're here to explore it together. Until next time, stay curious, stay human, and never stop asking how the past shaped the world we live in today.